A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. The anti-immigration agitations continue in South Africa, and so have the conversations surrounding immigration on the continent, why this might be a political issue, and what governments are doing about it. On Sunday, the Nigerian High Commission in South Africa released a statement on Sunday in which it reiterated grave concerns over the persistent incidents of violence-prone marches in South Africa. The three-page statement called on South African authorities to act decisively to ensure that no foreign national is unlawfully targeted and victimized. It says, it is important to state clearly and unequivocally that South Africans are inherently not xenophobic. The overwhelming majority of South Africans live peacefully alongside Nigerian and African migrants. Nevertheless, we note with concerns that many South Africans continue to hold uninformed perceptions about Nigerians and other Africans, broadly associating them with criminalities and other social vices. It goes on to establish that the majority of Nigerians in South Africa are established entrepreneurs and business owners who operate normal enterprises in urban and rural centers, universities, hospitals, and corporate environments. These categories of Nigerians do not pose threat to the economic livelihoods, nor stand in the way of ordinary South Africans that are creating their own value chains or opportunities. Instead, they generate their own businesses, inject capital, create jobs, and bring entrepreneurial energy that complements and expands the overall economy. It acknowledges that South Africa faces genuine and pressing socio-economic challenges, including high unemployment and poverty, which gave rise to grievances among citizens. The South African government has condemned what it says were fake videos and images that have been described by some as recordings of attacks on foreign nationals in the country. South Africa has seen a wave of protests against illegal immigration, which have been accompanied by instances of violence against immigrants from other sub-Saharan African countries in South Africa. Meanwhile, migrant groups say they are being scapegoated by South Africans who blame them for the country's economic problems, namely high unemployment, which is around 30%, and which disproportionately affects the black populations. Nigeria and Ghana are the only two countries seriously considering repatriation following attacks on their citizens. Joining us now is the chairman, Nigeria-South Africa Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Ije Chidema. She joins me from her home in Lekki. Dr. Chidema, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much, Amarachi. I'm very pleased to be here.
Yes, and what a time to have this conversation. You are the person to speak to, aren't you, about Nigeria-South Africa relations in light of the anti-immigration protests that have been going on across the country and those feelings of, well, some would say Afrophobia, some would say xenophobia, but those feelings of the agitations against the government about what it's doing regarding immigration problems in South Africa. I want to begin with, a statement released by the Nigerian High Commission in South Africa, where it states that, the death of any Nigerian during these protests going on in the country is one too many. It's about 3 pages long, but it does, state clearly the Nigerian position about Nigeria not tolerating, these types of protests and the deaths that are associated with them, but also calling on the South African government to do more about this, but reposing enough confidence on the South African government. Let's get your initial thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. Greetings, viewers. Yes, Amarachi, I've gone through the statement issued by the Nigeria High Commission in South Africa, and I totally agree with them. It's well articulated, and what is being said is that we should be focused in terms of bilateral cooperation in the continent. We should be very focused and also understand that there has been historical ties between the two countries, Nigeria and South Africa, and we've come a long way. right from the days of colonization and the days of apartheid, during which Nigeria played critical roles. So we should be conversant of that, especially our youth. And it has called for advocacy groups, including organizations like this chamber, to engage because communication is key in matters like this, in building trust. Sometimes when things like this happen, people sometimes get carried away in terms of emotions, but we should not lose sight of building together, because Nigeria and South Africa are leading economies in Africa. It is understandable that sometimes, particularly during economic challenges, things like this do happen. Of course, we know that there are economic challenges now, not only in South Africa, but also in Nigeria. And elsewhere in the world is in a state of flux, and there's a lot of turbulence. But what it calls for is concerted efforts. It calls for focus, single-mindedness in not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
South African people say, they're angry that people who are not documented in South Africa are being allowed to stay, their businesses allowed to thrive, while the rest of South Africa, the people for whom the country, was put together for, do not have access to social welfare. They don't have access to health care. The jobs promised by the government, they don't have because they believe that, foreigners are taking these jobs. That's what the agitation is about. What do you think it really is about?
Yes, sometimes there could be such thinking, but I think more education is needed in this direction. And when you have things like that, the main thing is that if we are talking about immigration has always been there. People look for greener pastures, but it's for the country to make sure that they have their rules and regulations that guide it in terms of whether you call it documentation or whatever is required for someone to stay in a country, like as a permanent resident or even as a naturalized citizen. So it's up to the authorities to ensure that lawful procedures are followed. Those sort of work are not the kind of work that will be left for those that are not trained in this aspect, like groups of people taking it upon themselves. I think that is wrong. We should all go for the rule of law, whether it's in South Africa or in Nigeria, and do the right thing. People should not be feel threatened in any way. So if there are undocumented migrants, I believe there should be processes of looking at it. There are agencies that have been set up to look at all these things. Customs are there and so on. So we should de-escalate this. And also, I think the populace generally, whether Nigerians or South Africa, need more education. This is what our chamber is trying as much as possible to be part of. We're engaging with our South African counterparts in making sure that this is done. Because some people, the masses, as we call them, or the generality of the people, sometimes they depend on social media, which might not say the whole story. But we need to tell our stories. When we know our stories, then we would have a better view of that. The way I see it is not about competition or jobs. It's, the way I'm even looking at it, we must look at the shared prosperity. There are a lot of things going on the good side our continent. We have young people, so we need to educate them, whether in South Africa or in Nigeria, and then reorientate them because the world is changing fast. The world is changing fast. South Africa of the 60s is not South Africa of today. Neither is Nigeria of the 60s, Nigeria of today. There are so many things coming into view, and then we even need to do much more. I think this is a good time calling for even greater thinking in terms of strategies, because so many things are coming on now, use of AI and other things. So the sooner we have better strategies in terms of how to address some of these things, the better, because there are opportunities,
Yes,
so that are bound, that we have to make use of on both sides.
Yeah, but Dr. Jidema, being the president of the Nigeria-South Africa Chamber of Commerce, some may say that your position is elitist because you said, you're having conversations in the chamber. That chamber is made up of people who pay dues to be part of an organization. What about the South Africans who are not members of the chamber and Nigerians who are not members of the chamber who are part of the informal economy that these protests affect, and agitations like this ruin their own sources of livelihood?
Yes, thank you very much. You are right in that. It will not be wrong if there are perceptions like that. But we are building, it takes time to build. We are building. Just last year, we created another category for SMEs, right? At onset, we engaged with a lot of big companies that have set shop in Nigeria, and we played critical roles in making that happen and in supporting them. So, but we knew that the time has come for us to explore other areas. So we've set up SMEs for those sort of organizations or informal organizations you are talking about, because I think they are the future. And the idea of setting them up is to provide governance structures, help them to build whatever they have. The Dangotes of this world started as trading posts. So that's the way we are looking at it. We know that Nigerians, entrepreneurs, many of them are gifted, very, very innovative. So we are also looking at those areas to see how we can help them to do business properly. And then a number of them have expressed interest in joining our chamber, and they are joining. They are joining. So the idea is to help them to know how to run their businesses. Some are well gifted, but they should also know that this is business that they are running and they need structures. So these are areas we will help them in terms of training, in terms of education that you are talking about. We have, in fact, after our 25th anniversary, we launched a project to tell the stories about the links between the two countries. If you remember, during the apartheid, Nigeria played critical roles. So people need to know what roles Nigeria played. People need to know that the generality of Nigerians love South Africans. And I believe South Africans also love Nigerians. So we need to, so we are documenting all those things to tell our stories ourselves, how we helped. Even students contributed their lunch money to that effect. And even took on our South African brothers, their past presidents, the Madiba himself, President Nelson Mandela, and even President Thabo Mbeki. They were all here in Nigeria. So that's the way we would like to focus on this as business leaders, because we believe that there's a lot happening in our continent, a lot that we can take advantage of.
I just wanted to take a few steps back to something you said about how Nigeria helped South Africa. And I've heard this in some South African circles that they do acknowledge all of the help. that the rest of Africa provided during the time of the apartheid. But they also wonder, for how long will the rest of Africa hold this above their heads, and ask them to be grateful? And what does gratitude look like? Does it involve them opening their borders to everyone who wants to come into South Africa? There should be rules to follow, is what they're saying.
Far from it. Why I'm even saying that is that, there are different angles. There's rational angle, there's emotional angle. Mine is both rational and emotive. So why I mentioned it is that we have to tell our stories. We have to publish our books so that the young people, if you look, most of the people involved are young people, and some of them were not even born at that time. So that's why I made that point. But that does not mean that because of that, then they should open up their borders to undocumented immigrants. Apart from it, nobody is saying that. All we are saying is that if you have an idea of the total picture, then of course there will be trust. You will know that we are working together as a family. It's just like in a family that people work together. Sometimes they disagree or they misunderstand themselves. But when more light is thrown, maybe by the parents and all that, people tend to now understand. Because if you don't know where you're coming from, where the rain started beating you, if I have to use the African balance, then everything is lost. So that's why I'm saying that. And we have a lot in common. They say Ubuntu. Ubuntu meaning I can only succeed because both of us are working together. There's African collectiveness. Africans are collective in their ways. Here in my own local dialect, we say Gwebike. So we need to strengthen. That's why I'm saying that, of course, as a chamber, as a business leader, rule of law is central. So these are things we emphasize. Rule of law is central, so we continue to educate even our own people. If you have to go to another person's country, you have to make sure that you abide with whatever regulations there is. So that's what we're advocating for.
Dr. Chidema, what impacts, some of these protests and these agitations have had, on Nigerian businesses, real, impacts they've had on businesses that are members of the chamber?
Yes, of course. When you have those kinds of tensions, it has adverse effect. There's no doubt about that on everybody, on the citizens, even South African citizens, Nigerian citizens, citizens of the rest of Africa. There's no doubt about that. When people cannot move freely, so many of the people there that are involved in informal business, like you said, they've had to shut their businesses because they do not feel free. And that is what we should not encourage.
No, but I mean, businesses that are part of the Nigeria-South Africa Chamber of Commerce, have they been impacted by the protests that are going on in South Africa?
Yes, our members, they're concerned. They're concerned, but they are.
But have they been impacted by the protests? Have they been impacted by it? Has it impacted on their businesses?
There's no doubt that eventually it will impact their businesses. So they're being proactive. They don't want. The thing is to stand by the rule of law, whatever it is. If people are supposed to have certain documents or get certain visas, they need to get it. They also believe that there should be maintenance of dignity of man. People should not be unduly harassed, or even killed. It's very difficult to imagine that, or even killed because there could be violence. So that should be avoided. So they're engaging at all levels. Our members, they're engaging at all levels, even in terms of engaging with our presidency in South Africa as well. So I think we all have to work together. There are lots of responsibilities. There's government, there's community, there are associations like the chamber, there are companies, there are individuals. So the point is, we all have to brace up in terms of our advocacy. We have to brace up and we must continue to look at the the overall picture. That's the picture that everybody, the masses, at all levels have to see, that if Nigeria and South Africa work together, the sky will be the limit. I think that's that should be the story. And that is correct, because we are so endowed in so many ways. South Africa, in terms of infrastructure, is like an advanced economy. And you come here in Nigeria, the level of creativity is immense. So we can work together and showcase ourselves to the world. And in fact, even looking at the wider continent, beyond South Africa and Nigeria, they're looking up to the two countries as to be exemplary. So we cannot let them down in whatever way.
What would you advise the government to do? Because we're trying to tackle this from various levels, diplomatically, government-wise, economically, and lots of advocacy going on. I know that one of the complaints that the South Africans have, of course, is the irregular migration, the undue, influx of people, Africans especially, into South Africa. And they suggest also that the countries where these people are coming from should do their part in stemming the tide of migrants leaving their country and coming into South Africa. If you had a chance to speak with the government, what would you say?
Well, generally, it's the responsibility of the country that people are migrating to define their own terms. If you ask me, they should have to define their own terms. And in terms of our people going to South Africa, we need to educate them more in terms of conduct, in terms of also the opportunities that lie here. You cannot, migration is more like an individual thing. You cannot stop someone. Migration has always been there. People have always moved to greener pastures, or what they think are greener pastures. And I think our government can also, in a way, have a structured way of that migration. Because I can see there are lots of Nigerians there, even doctors, so many people doing a lot of good. So it can be done in a better structured way. We are providing the, would I say, pipeline, maybe pipeline of certain kinds of people to South Africa, whether it's doctors, whether it's nurses, in whichever way, and vice versa, because we also need them here. From time to time, the delegates come to Nigeria that advance in mining and all those kinds of things. So we can also, so the two governments, there's also the Binational Commission, and we have the Joint Ministerial Advisory Council. We are trying to also use that in terms of advising our governments in terms of what they should be doing, or focus, giving them support and all that. So we can actually do that way, so that it makes it easier for everybody, it makes it smoother. In fact, the people you are even sending, you train them. And training is not just about technical skills. Training is also about conduct. Training is also about value system. Training is also about sort of reorientation. Mm-hmm. Those are the kinds of things we should be looking at. And also on the part of South Africa, I mean, we cannot leave the regulation to people on the streets. We cannot. We have to brace up to proper regulation in terms of customs, in terms of people who are coming, in terms of immigration officers, and so on.
Dr. Ije Jidemma, Chairman, Nigeria South Africa Chamber of Commerce, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very much, Amarachi. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And this is where we end the program this week. As always, we welcome your comments, but keep them respectful. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.